Does God care about small places? How can we faithfully serve Christ in a rural context? What is the future of the church in rural America? The Rural Ministry Podcast deals with questions like this and much more in the hopes of bringing practical resources and inspiring stories to help the church flourish in rural communities. Dr. Charlie Cotherman is the Executive Director at the Center for Rural Ministry, Assistant Professor of Biblical Studies at Grove City College, and the pastor of a rural church in Oil City, Pennsylvania. Join the conversation as we journey into the good things God is doing in small places. All right. Well, welcome to another episode of the Rural Ministry Podcast, where we talk about the unique challenges and joys of living and doing ministry in rural places. I'm your host, Garrett Heath, Director of Media and Communications at the Center for Rural Ministry at Grove City College, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Charlie Cotherman. Charlie is the Executive Director at the Center for Rural Ministry, Assistant Professor of Biblical Studies at Grove City College, and he's also the pastor of Oil City Vineyard Church in Oil City, Pennsylvania. So today's episode has been highly anticipated, at least for the two of us here at the show, right? And that is because by the time this episode drops, Charlie's brand new book will have been released. It's entitled Strip Mine Jesus, Hope for the Rural Church, Small Towns, and Overlooked Places. And rather than me, I think, blabbering on too much about it, why don't we hear from the author himself, Charlie? Maybe tell us a little bit about this thing.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited. Any project that I'm sure most people listening have this feeling of like a project you've worked on for a long time and dreamt about for longer than that. It's kind of what this has been. I'm still it's one of those things that, in some sense, I'm just grateful that God let this happen, because it feels like the odds are so stacked against a person in a small town and a small church pastor being able to write a book like this with a house like Baker, that I'm just super grateful. And hopefully this book is going to, my hope is that it's not just because it's not written like this. It's not a how to do rural ministry. It's really a book, I hope, to inspire folks to look again at the potential of their community and what God can do there and is already actually doing. And so it's written with lots of stories about local folks. I hope if you've, grown up in Venango County, Clarion County, you recognize some of the people. Some are by name or some just by story. But I think no matter where you're at, if you're in an overlooked community, rural community, small town, or even honestly a neighborhood that feels overlooked in a larger place, some of this I think will ring true. I hope it will.
Yeah, well, and I've already got a sneak peek. I've got to be part of the process here throughout the journey. And it is so much about stories, right? Human stories. And before we jump in anymore, like I do want to just say that this is kind of kicking off a new series for the podcast as well, kind of on rural storytelling and the significance there. So maybe that's a good kind of little introduction to the book too. Like why are stories important, particularly in rural places?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I just want to celebrate this series for just a minute, because you think you're going to hear from some folks who are living in small towns, rural places, and are just really good at telling stories. One of them is going to be Garrett. So you'll get to hear him being interviewed rather than being the interviewee or interviewer. So I'm excited about that. But we have to tell stories about small places if we want those stories to exist, because the people that typically write, for the big publishing houses and the mainstream newspapers, and, they're not actually in our communities. How are they going to tell the stories that are on the ground, true stories about life in small places, if people from small places aren't writing them, aren't making those films, aren't telling those stories? And so I think part of the joy of being like entrusted by God as his, image bearers to actually steward creation is to make sure we highlight all parts of creation. And I think the best people to do that in small places are people from those places, not folks who just drive in for a day, make a couple notes, and then write a piece for the New York Times. No, like
Yeah.
we want to
And
tell.
those are the stories we're used to seeing, right?
Yes, and I can pretty much tell you what those are all going to be like. To be like, wow, it's bad here. Who would want to live here? That's pretty much how those stories go.
Yeah, and there's so many stories of escape, right, as well
Mhm.
from rural places. Um, but there's a certain intentionality, I think, too, that we need to have as people living in rural places, right? If we want to tell the stories, we have to make them, we have to write them,
Mhm.
right?
That's right. And we have to first notice them, which might be a good way to kind of talk about a lot of what this book is about. In some ways, this is a book about paying attention, the power of attention, and the need for attentiveness. And, um, even the title, Strip Mine Jesus, comes out of my own kind of way God's helped me see that through the unreclaimed strip mine that was on my parents' property, that actually almost becomes like a character in the story of my childhood, like almost another member of the family, is this strip mine, because my brother and I spent so much time back there. And learning how to actually attend to the geography and to the actual place that we lived was actually a lesson for me in life, in church planting and pastoring, and probably simply in following Jesus.
Yeah. Well, as a side note too, we had some fun maybe a month ago. We shot a little short film about the book, and if anybody wants to see the actual strip mine, we have all kinds of good footage throughout that film. I was directing Charlie very awkwardly to walk among different shots very strategically. But it really is a good glimpse into the world of the strip mine. I don't know how many people out there listening have physically walked through a strip mine, but it's yeah, it's an experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, the crackle of the shale bits under your feet, like the spoil piles that are still there. Now, when folks look at that video, they're going to have to remember this mine was, the mining actually happened in the mid to early late 50s. And so, like, it doesn't look as brown or as clay like as it did, because nature's pretty good at reclaiming ground over time, but you can still tell. And people that have been around these mines, I mean, you have an eye for it. You can just tell
Yep.
where it is by driving along the road.
Yeah. When so many of our landscapes here in this rural part of Western Pennsylvania, literally just out in my backyard here, right? So many of our landscapes are shaped by these old strip mines.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, Pennsylvania was second only to Eastern Kentucky in surface mining, um, in,
yeah,
in kind of the early to mid 20th century.
yeah. Well, and it's an eye catcher too as a title for a book. So strip
Yeah, I'm
mine
waiting for the
Jesus,
parody title
right?
to come out, right? I
Yeah.
can already imagine.
Yeah. So what just to dive in a little bit here, like what's the inspiration here? Like why write this book?
Yeah. Well, it's a kind of a two-pronged thing. One is like the inspiration, which I've had for a long time, and the other is the opportunity, which is
Well,
not the same.
maybe even more important. Yeah.
Yeah. So the inspiration has been, I have felt this for a long time, that people from small places need to tell the stories of small places. I just deeply feel that. So many times, by the way, people from small places move away, never go back, and feel like they're the ones, though, that need to tell the story about it. And I want to see more stories told by people who are living in small places when they write the story, not like reflecting on 30 years ago when I lived in a small place, because it's a lot easier. It's not that anyone can be condescending. You can live in a small place and be condescending, but it's a lot easier to be condescending when that's a part of your childhood that you somehow got out of,
Yeah.
and now you're reflecting. So I've had a kind of a burning in my soul for small places, and for telling stories well that honor the people and places and honor the potential of God in those places. I've had that for a long time. But that is different, because there's probably a lot of people listening that actually have that same burning to some degree. That's different than having an opportunity to write, uh, for a publishing house like Baker. Then that was, in some ways, like its own story. That was kind of a godsend. That honestly, because I mean, I've pitched books on rural ministry. I've pitched books with this same title and been rejected by the same publishing house. So, like, how God opened up this opportunity kind of through a weird roundabout way. And honestly, one of the most important things on the journey was the advice of a couple of friends, and the recommendation of a friend, where one friend kind of sent my name along, but then it was for a different project, actually, a historical project. And I had another friend who I actually talk about in the book, Ken Elzinga, who was visiting Grove City, doing some stuff with the Center for Rural Ministry. And he said, you're so busy and you have young kids, you need to really be careful about your time. And he said, if I were you, I would recommend do not take on a book project unless it is a book that only you could write. That's the only book project you should do at this stage in life right now. And I thought about that. And I thought, the only project that I know of like that in my life is this one on small town attentiveness and ministry. And so I went back to the editor at Baker and said, hey, can we have a conversation about changing this entire project to this theme? And, praise God, he was open to the conversation and it made it through all the stages. And lo and behold, they wanted the same title that I had recommended years before and been denied. So I just say thank you. I'm grateful.
Yeah, well, the time was right, and I think to your point about it being a book that only you could write. I think it is me having already read it.
Yeah.
I think it really is cool how the stories you tell, but like looking at your role at the Center for Rural Ministry, teaching at Grove City College, being a pastor on the ground in Oil City, like your roles really all kind of come together in the writing of this book. So it's pretty cool. It's
Mm.
pretty cool. Um,
A gift, and
yeah,
I think this does actually say something that the book's about, and that's paying attention. Like, I
yeah,
think this is what we're all called to do, is try to pay attention to what God's doing in your life. And instead of like make a new route, stay, God, with the route that I've been given, that I've inherited to some degree, that my work through your power of your spirit has enabled me to do. Like, what are you doing with this? And that's what I hope this project is like me trying to be attentive to just the way God has orchestrated my story and my life, from the strip mind in my childhood all the way till today.
yeah. And I think that's going to be a big piece of this whole series here. The storytelling series, this attentiveness piece, right? You can't tell stories without being attentive. We have to get to know a place. We have to get to know ourselves. We have to get to know the people around us, and and not in a way that we're like taking something, but in a way that we have the kind of this deep knowledge that you can only get from being intertwined in a community, right? Um, and that's the real sense that we get from this book. So like you do hit really hard on this theme of attentiveness kind of out of the gate in this book.
Mhm.
What just dive into that a bit for us. What
Yeah. Well, and the image, as you were even just talking, I was thinking this image came to me. It may or may not work. That's how it's, as a pastor, sometimes these things happen in the moment. You're like, I think this might be helpful. And, but sometimes it's not. But I do, it's less like, there's a way of being attentive that's honestly, it's kind of exploitative. So,
yeah.
people are attentive. Like, I know there's coal there, right? And the image that came to me is like an Easter egg hunt. Like, you're attentive in an Easter egg hunt to find the eggs to get the most eggs. Like, people can be attentive like that to stories. And honestly, that's how like the reporters that come in for the weekend are. Like, they're like Easter egg hunters, you
Yep.
know? I want to be attentive like the person who has listened at the family table over like one Thanksgiving after another to aunts and uncles telling family stories, and you've learned it enough that you can then tell it, like
Mm-hmm.
you're passing it on. It's not for yourself, it's actually for the next generation. So that's the kind of attentiveness that I hope this book conveys. And honestly, I think our model for that is Jesus. I mean, think about Jesus. Very seldom in his teaching is talking in the abstract. Like, don't worry about, clothing or anything. No, he's like, but look at that bird. Look at that
Yeah.
flower. God's taking care of them, right? It's not like just care for the poor. No, he says the poor you'll have with you always, but that poor person right there, he's going to, you
Yeah.
know. And so I think Jesus is our model for paying attention. In fact, the incarnation is a great example of attentiveness in itself.
It shapes the entire way that we see the world,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
and
it should shape the entire way that we live in a small town, right? Right?
100%, 100%. So that's kind of the impetus for all this. I do think all of our terms, like, we know this, like we talk about paying attention. We put a value on it. Like you pay money, well, you pay attention. We have now the attention economy. We know that attention connotes value. And so I really start by talking about that. And that's what I hope the whole book models. But the next thing I do is actually talk about things that keep us from paying attention, because I think, you got to know your enemy. You got to know if
Yep.
you're in a battle and you don't realize it, you're just a sitting duck. And I think there are certain things in our culture that make it really hard to pay attention. And certain things, and this is what I talk about in that second chapter, certain things that are specifically opposed to helping us pay attention in small places, because there are certain things that impact all of our culture. But there's some parts of that really work in specifically hard against being able to pay attention in small places.
Yeah, I mean, it's and I think the feeling kind of in rural places that is maybe that we used to be immune to some of these.
Mm,
But maybe as the internet has and social media has kind of gained access everywhere, right? These are maybe even more significant now.
mhm,
Like I know even just looking through the table of contents here, you hit on celebrity,
mhm,
efficiency,
mhm,
autonomy,
mhm,
right? These aren't things that you really necessarily equate to small places, but like if you live in a small place now, if you're a pastor of a small church, like these are everywhere, right? And an intimate part of all of our lives, right?
mhm.
So
Yeah. And I'll just go into one, because as we were talking before the show, like my goal in even conversations like this is not to like lay out exactly what's in the book, because I've
yeah.
read a few of the chapters and I honestly think, because you spend so much time thinking about what you write, they're written better than I can say them in a moment like this. So I really encourage you to go read it, because like you'll know my heart if you read that book. But I will just say, like, let's take one like celebrity. Well, okay, we know there's a huge celebrity culture in our country. We know that it's just people are famous and for being famous now. Like they're, and not only famous for being famous, but now we know that that's monetized, so that you can actually
Yeah.
become rich from being famous.
Yeah. It's about having a platform, right?
Yeah. You used to be that, you were rich and then you became famous, but now if you can just get famous, you can get rich, because then you can run your platform, you can your followers, and we see this in like the NIL deals that even collegiate athletes sign. It's no surprise that the ones that have the biggest Instagram accounts get the biggest dollar deals. So this is the reality. And you might say, well, what's that have to do with small town pastors? I don't know any small town pastors that want to be celebrities. Well, then again, you think about it and you're like, well, maybe I do actually. They this thing, like you talk about the kind of way that our culture has seeped in. I mean, imagine like 30 years ago, selfies. And if a pastor was always pointing a camera at himself and posting it somewhere public, like we'd be like, there's something wrong with them. And now we all want to be celebrities, and the selfie is kind of like just accepted. I always tell people, imagine Jesus taking a selfie. Try to imagine that, and then think about if it'd be a good idea for us. But like, what's a selfie do? It's a way of taking our own celebrity into our own hands and saying, I don't have anyone else even to take a photo right now. I'm just going to make it happen. Um, and so things like that. I mean, and I'm in the same boat. I get it. We had recorded sermons. We didn't have video sermons till COVID. My wife was actually totally against it. And but then COVID came, right? And now we have video sermons, right? Well, if you're on camera, you start thinking just slightly more. At least most of us do. Some people don't, but most of us think a little bit more about how we appear, things like that, right? We're on a podcast. Increasingly, there's a sense that like even a local celebrity is possible. But let's be honest, if you want to be a big celebrity, if that's something that the culture prioritizes, you don't go to a small place to do it. So the movement is going to be away from small towns if we value celebrity.
Yep.
And I think I'm going to make an argument that the value of celebrity is pretty high in our culture, even in small places. And the movement's always going to be away. You pretty much never get famous and decide to move to a small place. It's almost always the other way.
Indeed. Well, and I mean, the good news here too is it's actually the tone of the whole book is actually really positive. It's not like this,
That's right. It's not
you
Jeremy.
know,
No.
very negative kind of the moral failures of our culture, right? Like you're hitting on these things so that we can be aware of them,
Mhm.
right? You're allowing us to kind of see them for what they are, but you're also providing kind of these antidotes, right? So like to take celebrity as our example, right? You have an antidote kind of to that in small places, right?
Yeah. So the way the book works is, at least in my mind, and maybe no one else gets this. You know, you have these constructions, the architecture of a big project that like you see, but no one else sees. But I specifically name these three kind of what I would call idols of our age that blind us, right? Because you become what you worship. I really believe that the Bible has us worshiping our Maker, and we become more like image bearers. More, we represent Him better. If you worship an idol, you become more like that idol. Eyes that don't see, ears that don't hear, down the whole road that the psalmist lays out and Isaiah lays out. Uh, so, how do we actually confront some of these idols that really want to constrain our vision, truncate our vision? And one of the ways I think, for instance, in celebrity, is stability, actually. If you think about celebrity really works by being kind of larger than life and unknown. And stability works against that, actually, because over time in a place, you will be known. I'm just now listening. One of the things I do on my long drive to Grove City is like 50 minutes. I listen to audiobooks, and it's the 250th anniversary. So I listened to John Adams in the spring. Now I'm listening to this Wrong Check Now's long Pulitzer Prize winning biography of Washington. And just this morning on the way, I heard him say something like, "No one's a hero to their valet," right? Like it was Washington's people close to him. They all looked up to him, but they like Alexander Hamilton as an aide. He was like, "But there are these foibles in him," right? Like no one's
Yeah.
perfect when you're up that close, and that's what stability does. When you live in a place with people over time, it actually helps you avoid celebrity
Hmm.
because you're known. You're not just that pastor I see on the podcast or whatever. You are like the softball coach, the neighbor who didn't cut their grass on time, right? You're known in a different way, and so it works against it. I would say, even like the goodness of the beauty of community is one of the chapters. The goodness of stability, the truth of our identity. I think these all can work against some of the idols of our age.
Yeah. I think it's great, and we've hit on this before a little bit, maybe in this podcast. I mean, some of these themes come up, um, but the way that a rural community can kind of help be the antidote to some of these larger cultural issues, right? When you're part of a community, it simply doesn't allow you to kind of fall into some of these snares if you're invested, right? So
Yes.
there's advantages, especially for a rural pastor, I think,
Yeah.
right?
Because it works against reductionism.
Yes.
So I love the story. I think I've told it on this podcast before. And James Houston, after living 103 years, did pass away March 15th of this year. So may he rest in peace. He was I got to spend some time with James Houston, the founder of Regent College in Vancouver, when I was doing research on my other book. But he was old enough to have actually been in a Bible study or a theological conversation group with C.S. Lewis. And he says, no one really got that close to C.S. Lewis. He was pretty guarded. But when Houston was going to move out of Oxford, or Lewis was actually going to move to Cambridge to take the job, Houston said, "Hey, tell me what I just want to know one thing. What's the overall emphasis of your work? And he says, Lewis responded in kind of his very concise way against reductionism. And I think that idea has really stuck with me, that we live in a world that wants to reduce us. Oh, you're this, you do this. This is your function that provides value for your community or you. And I think small places, and this has historically been true, you almost have to be more of a generalist in a small place as a pastor, as whatever job you're doing. Even as a human, it helps you because you're known on so many different levels, as I
Mm.
kind of said earlier, that small places actually help us be more holistically human than larger places. And I do think that's probably true.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, to that point too, I don't want people to get the feeling here that like you're just going to view rural places through kind of rose tinted glasses here
Yeah.
either, right? Like, I mean, so many positive stories, right, about real people in real rural communities and places. With stories who can, I think, shape all of us for the better. But like, this conversation also has to be about reality
Hmm.
as it is on the ground,
Hmm.
right? And I think the way that you kind of provide that toward the second half of this book is like you actually talk about the theme of suffering,
Mm.
right? This may not sell quite as many book copies, but it's got to be part of the conversation here with rural places, right? This suffering and hope, and even just the willingness to take on the possibility of suffering, right, in a small place, because there is a giving up of some of the larger opportunities potentially in your life, right?
Yeah. So I end the book with a chapter on suffering and hope in small town America. And I just kind of knew from the start when I was working on this book concept that I had to talk about suffering, because if you've been, I mean, all humans, no matter where you live, understand that life comes with suffering. We try to push it away. The tech bros are trying to like freeze their bodies so that they're suffering, like, they'll come back because they don't like the suffering of the thought of death. But like we all know, no matter if we're billionaire or trillionaire or, on the street, the suffering's part of our life, even though we try to entertain ourselves so we don't remember it. But there are certain kinds of suffering that come with small places. And I wanted to name those, at least some of them. It's definitely not exhaustive. There could be a whole book on that. But, anytime you commit yourself to relationally to a people and a place, you open the door to suffering. That's why a lot of people that don't want to deal with suffering isolate themselves. They don't want the risk of that relationship. They don't want the risk of it. And we live in a country and a world where people are in more and more isolating themselves. This is why we have a loneliness epidemic. I talk about that in the book. But one of the reasons people isolate themselves is they don't want the risk of suffering. But if you're going to be integrated into a community, you're going to suffer. So I tell stories of what it's like to suffer with a place. Like maybe it's the tragic event, maybe it's the natural disaster, maybe it's smaller scale. Maybe it's. I mean, I like things like if you live in a rural area that didn't have ticks 20 years ago and now you have ticks and tick-borne diseases everywhere, it feels different. And some of you are going to get it when I say that. Like it's just a completely different feeling to walk in the woods than it was 20 years ago in Western Pennsylvania. That's a kind of suffering that comes with a rural place. And also there's a kind of mental suffering, right? Like the stigma, the kind of like way that your kids might, the sense you have that your kids might all leave. Like we live on a street of relatively older people, many of whom have kids that have left. And like sometimes, you know, you just feel for them when they're sitting in their house, their kids are across the country and they might make it back once a year. There's a kind of suffering that goes with that. And so I talk about those things, but it's also in the context of hope because I tell a couple stories at the end, and I'm not going to give it away which ones I tell, but I think they're powerful, about people that have, in the midst of that, found that God actually brought their story to a conclusion they couldn't have imagined without the suffering they endured. And I think if you're willing to actually try to find God in the suffering, that he can use that
Hmm.
for good. Not that he might, I'm not saying he brings the suffering necessarily, but like he works in all things for our good. And so I tell a few stories about that. Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if we have Jesus, we have hope.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and that's a large part of the Christian journey, I guess, is I, I mean, really, I think, for all of us in life, right? It's kind of choose your suffering, right, right. Like it's unavoidable, but we like to have control of it. But for us as Christians, right, we can actually find joy in it, right? God can actually meet us within it, and we can recognize that fact. And that's where hope comes from. So, yeah, I mean, as we're approaching the end of our time here, we could go on and on. We could have really a whole series just on your book. Um, and I'd be fine with that. But just in closing, what, what do you hope people take away from this?
Yeah. Sometimes people ask you, like, well, who's this book for? And increasingly in kind of the book marketing world, they want you to have this specific target audience. And I don't know if I had a specific target audience, but I had a few people in mind when I wrote this book. You know, Pastors like those that I've worked with in my own life, in my own ministry through the Oil City Ministerium, growing up in Knox, the pastors I've been with and under, the pastors we work with at the Center for Rural Ministry, absolutely. Young people thinking about ministry, absolutely. So there is this kind of pastoral component where I'm definitely attuned to the needs of rural and small town pastors and kind of like hurdles, even mental, theological hurdles that they might face to actually accepting or embracing like a life of ministry in small places, and really the obscurity that often comes with it. Now, Baker kind of wanted that to be the only audience. And I've pushed against it from the start because that's not, in my mind, the only audience for this book when I was writing it. I also was really thinking about my students. We've worked with so many. We actually had a great article come out last week from one of our graduating fellows, which we should actually attach to this so that people can see, who was just after 2 years with the Center for Rural Ministry. She was kind of like, I'm actually going back to my small town to invest, and I'm actually excited about it. And so it's for students like that are from a small place that are wondering, is it worth it? Could I have a flourishing life in a small place? Is that even, if I want to like have a significant life and even be used by God, should I just avoid small places because it's not a big enough place to make a difference? I want to speak to those people. I've said this before and I'll say it again. None of us at the Center for Rural Ministry, and I don't think this way either, that we don't think that all people are called to small places. We don't think that all students should go to small places after they graduate. Even those that are from there, we don't think they should all go back or stay. But what I do want to do is make it easier for people to hear God's voice if he's saying go back, against the entire cultural milieu that says don't ever look back. That's a failure. I want to help people hear. And I think this book at its best can help people hear if God's speaking them to dig in to a small place, to love it well. And then the last person in my mind as I wrote this was actually my younger self. I was writing it for me when I was like in my early 20s trying to figure things out. And this is the book I wish I would have had decades ago. It would have been a big encouragement along the way.
Hmm. Well, thanks, Charlie. There you have it, folks. Strip Mine Jesus, Hope for the Rural Church, Small Towns and Overlooked Places. Go and buy it. Go and read it. It's going to be a great read. I promise. I got to be part of the journey early on, reading through the chapters. So, thanks, Charlie. I think this is a wrap for this week's episode. We hope our conversation has provided you with some encouragement, insight, maybe even a practical idea for your own ministry context. The Rural Ministry podcast is part of the good work being done at the Center for Rural Ministry at Grove City College. If you found this podcast helpful, there are a few free things you can do to help us out. First, you can share this episode with a friend or colleague who could benefit from it. You could even share the book, maybe buy a copy for a friend. Second, you can leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. This helps more people discover the show. And lastly, you can leave us a comment or suggestion over at the episode page, the Center for Rural Ministry YouTube channel. We hope to get some good conversations started over there as well. And thanks again for listening. You can learn more about our mission by visiting www.ruralministry.org. Have a great week.